Thanks for joining me. I'm Nicole Martin, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about vicarious trauma and mindfulness and kind of give you a quick overview of what I would do in this course. I want to start off with some of the objectives of the course and what your audience can expect to get out of it. First, it is learning more about vicarious trauma. What is it? How do you define it? As well as the signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma. Also going into the second half of the course, which is on mindfulness and self-care. So understanding what mindfulness is, self-care, and how the two with vicarious trauma tie together and why it's important for them. The length of this course can run 3 hours, but I'm a very flexible person, as Rutgers is very flexible, so we can pare that down to 2 hours if necessary. I have found that audiences that have gone through vicarious trauma training before, that part can be used more as an overview, so there's no need to spend a ton of time in it, just more of remembering and waking up their brains to remember what vicarious trauma is, and then spending more time on the mindful self-care piece, which in my opinion is where the meat is. That's the juicy stuff, and it's really interesting and a lot more fun than talking about vicarious trauma. Important, but not as fun. And so the audience for this course is anyone who is working to serve those who are victims of trauma. And this can span any number of people. It could be first responders, thinking police, fire, EMT. It can be therapists and counselors. It could be medical professionals, government agencies who work with folks that have been victims of crime, for example. Even nonprofit organizations who are looking to support individuals who are victims of trauma, even if they're not on that front line or that front intake. So as I mentioned before, the agenda for this course is in 2 parts. The first part is all about vicarious trauma and identifying it, and the second part is focused on mindfulness and self-care. And in that second part of the program, I actually have created a workbook that I hand out to the audience members, which is a nice tool to use alongside. They get all of their definitions in there, all of the exercises we go through, and even more if we don't have time to go through them, and it gives them space to take notes. So my goal is for folks to walk away more with, what do I do now? I went through this course, I'm not really sure what's gonna work for me. I've experienced a little bit of mindfulness and self-care during this time, but where do I go from here? And also, recognizing adult learning, you're going to only take away certain pieces in the training course and kind of forget about the rest. So this is a resource for folks to come back to as well when they need it, especially those who are working with vicarious trauma. Okay, so we start off with the definition of what is vicarious trauma. So simply put, vicarious trauma is the emotional or psychological distress from experiencing someone else's traumas. So this is not trauma that has happened to the individual on their own, it's happened through other people. And it builds up over time so that it starts to impact the core of that person. So there's a couple things that stand out here. First, obviously not something that you're experiencing on your own. It's someone else's trauma. It's hearing those details through the work that you're doing. It's also gradual, it's cumulative. So we don't know how many instances of trauma that individual is going to come into contact with before they start to kind of take it on themselves and embody it themselves. It may be 1 exposure, 10, 100, you don't know. So that's why it's important to be aware of the signs and symptoms, so that when that person, you see the personality change, or you experience it and you're aware of it within yourself, you know, hey, maybe I need to do something here. Maybe something needs to change. I need a break, whatever the case may be. And so we are aware of other cumulative stressors, such as burnout. I think that's the most common one. Burnout can happen to anyone under high stress situations. You don't have to work with victims of trauma to experience burnout. This could happen in a highly stressful corporate situation. And there's also compassion fatigue. This is physical and mental exhaustion, emotional withdrawal from really being empathetic to the folks that you're serving. So again, compassion fatigue is not quite as extreme as vicarious trauma. The key difference here is that if you are experiencing vicarious trauma, you're taking on that fear. You're being scared, and it's changing your view of the world as a result. So let's go into some of the factors that could create vicarious trauma in folks. First is just hearing the stories and the narratives of what's going on with those folks that have experienced trauma themselves. Hearing those details can be enough. It's also the photographs, autopsies, reports. It's those details, those graphic details that can have an impact as well. It can be direct or indirect responsibility for someone's well-being. So an example here is if you're working for a nonprofit and your responsibility is raising funds to keep a vital program going that will help victims of trauma, having that stress and knowing the people that you're going to support as a result of your work and the funds that you're raising, that can have an impact as well. The caseload, your caseload, that can have an impact. So depending on your role and your job, you might be coming into contact with multiple cases of trauma a day. And it's good to just be aware of how much you're taking on or how much your team members are taking on so that you know to check in and find out if people are doing okay. Do they need a break? Do they need maybe a couple less for a short period of time before they can take on their normal workload again? And finally, isolation due to the nature of your role. You might be in a role where you cannot talk about the details of what's going on, most likely outside of the office, but sometimes within the office as well. So knowing where you have that support group can be helpful. But if you have that feeling of isolation and you just can't discuss what you've experienced and let it all out to someone else who would understand, that will also have an impact. Now here's where vicarious trauma gets really interesting. You as an individual, your experience, your life, your history, you bring that with you to the office every day, no matter what job you're in. So that's going to have an impact on how and when vicarious trauma may impact you. So your personality traits. You might be a highly sensitive person. You might be empathetic. I would like to say that most people who are working with victims of trauma are empathetic. They are called to that job for a reason. So being aware that that may bring on the stress a little bit heavier than a normal person or a different person. Your personal beliefs, your own personal history of trauma and or addiction, your economic situation, or inherited family trauma. Inherited family trauma is really interesting. This could be trauma that happened to a family member, whether it was a parent, a grandparent, or even someone generations before. And those stories, that family history, it's discussed, it's passed down, it creates the way that you were raised. It creates those stories that you were told impacts your personal beliefs. So having an understanding of that as well may give you some insight into some triggers you may have. Current life situations for yourself or your loved ones, your own strengths and resilience, knowing that, and your self-care practices. That's why this is paired up with self-care as well. If you do not have a practice of self-care, and you don't have that toolbox to turn to in the times where you know you're starting to burn out and really feeling the weight of your job, that's going to have an impact too. So some signs and symptoms of vicarious trauma. There's the physical signs. So this can be not sleeping, sleeping too much. It can be muscle tension, general body aches. And again, these are things that you cannot contribute to something else that's happened beforehand. It's coming on almost out of nowhere. Emotional shifts. So feeling really guilty, maybe you're in a better situation than the people that you're working to support. Anger, irritability, that's out of nowhere. Thought shifts, really rigid thinking, meaning it's all black and white. It's hard to see the gray in between. And also just those intrusive thoughts, thinking about those really nasty details that you've come into contact with and just having them weigh on you and interrupt your thoughts regularly. Behavioral shifts as well. Absenteeism, isolation, using different behaviors to escape. So some of the more obvious ones, drugs and alcohol, turning to that to numb what you've been exposed to. Some of the less obvious ones, TV, video games, social media, even exercise to a degree. If you're turning to that to numb the pain instead of dealing with it, that is a sign as well. And relationships, so having no personal life, again, that isolation. And being really hypersensitive to the safety of your loved ones. If you're suddenly finding yourself very worried that what you're hearing from others may happen to you and your family, that's another sign as well. So how do we measure this? How do we know? I can't take credit for this, but I did find this amazing tool. It's the Professional Quality of Life Scale. And you guys can find it as well. It's public online, proqol.org. And they have a survey that's free to use and that I actually encourage folks in this industry to use regularly, not just once a year. And it measures both your levels of compassion satisfaction. How fulfilled and happy are you from the job that you do, as well as compassion fatigue, which is another way of saying vicarious trauma. So it measures on both scales. So you can see when you're trending really well or when maybe you're starting to slip. And so in this course, I will bring the survey, copies of the survey, to the audience and give them time to fill it out, go through the scoring and ratings, and only discuss if people feel comfortable discussing their specific situation. A lot of this is very personal on the self-care side as well. So while I encourage participation, I don't force or probe or call on people often because it can be uncomfortable and again, something that people are still trying to figure out within themselves. So this is a way to measure, and I've gotten really good feedback on it, and again, encourage people to use it pretty regularly just to see how you're trending. And that wraps up the vicarious trauma piece of the program. And so from here, now we have an idea of where we stand. Are we doing pretty well, not so burned out, or are we going, sort of to the negative side? Maybe there's some, aha moments from that survey. And now we talk about, well, what do we do about it? So I start off with an exercise on identifying what is real self-care versus faux or fake self-care, using different examples and talking about, why someone would think it's real or fake. And what really comes out of this is the definition of self-care. So deliberate actions that we take to fill ourselves back up, to re-energize ourselves. And self-care also being something that really works naturally for us. We are not forcing it. We're not doing it because we have to. We're doing it because we enjoy doing it. We know it's going to fill our cups. And so here's where we start with the workbook, by the way, and I will refer to the different pages and encourage people to take notes so they have that constant reminder. And so the other point to this as well is that it's very personal. So a lot of the discussion with this activity comes from what someone may say is self-care for them. Someone else will say, and I actually encourage this, I don't want to do this. I don't want to sit and meditate. I can't sit still. That's not going to work for me. Where someone else is like, yeah, I meditate 20 minutes every morning. Isn't that normal? It's normal for them. It may not be normal for the next person sitting next to them. And also realizing that what may work for you today may not work next week, next month, or next year. So it doesn't have to be, self-care does not have to be regimented. It can be flowing and can be whatever you need in any given moment. And that is really where mindfulness comes into it, to be aware of what's working for you. And that's why mindfulness and self-care go so well together. Because without that awareness, you may be doing something that you think you need to do or you have to do, or it's the trend, whatever the case may be, but it's not really filling you up. It's not actually self-care for you. So then we go into the definition of mindfulness. And this is awareness of internal thoughts, your environment around you in the current moment. And then, if you're going to the ninja level of mindfulness, it's being able to acknowledge those thoughts or external happenings and not judging them, letting them be, letting them go. So that's ninja level, because at that point you are able to choose how you want to respond versus having a gut reaction. And that's a difficult practice to come into place, and it's one that folks do need to work on. And we talk about what does that look like? And the act of self-care itself, that's interesting. The act of self-care itself is one of mindfulness, because you do need to understand what you are choosing to do, having that choice, and making a point to do it regularly for it to work. So I'm not sure that we have time to go through this, because I want to go through the rest of the slides here, but I do bring into 5 minutes, thank you. We will go into this. I'll make this work. So one of the exercises of many that I do with the audience is one of utilizing your 5 senses. When you tap into your 5 senses, this is the quickest and easiest way to get into the present moment. And so the goal of being present, of being mindful, is not to clear your mind. That's impossible by human nature. Our brains are not developed to be clear at any time, but to be aware of what's going on around you. So I bring everyone through this exercise and ask them to first, and you guys please play along, find a comfortable seat in your chair, feet on the ground, both feet on the ground if possible. Get comfortable and start taking a couple deep breaths to begin. And we're going to just circle through all of our 5 senses to bring us into the present moment. So let's start with sight and looking around your environment, taking notice of the details. You see everything on a broader scale to begin with. See if you can notice even more minute details. Pattern of the wall on the wall, pattern on the rug. How small can you bring your awareness? And then if you wish to close your eyes, which might heighten your other senses, we can come into hearing. What do you hear in the room? And if you take a moment to listen carefully, can you hear something now that you didn't hear before? Moving next to touch. With your hands on your lap or on the desk in front of you, what do you feel? It could also be awareness of your weight sitting in the chair, your feet connected to the ground. And next, smell. Notice what smells may be in the room. Someone has a snack or a drink next to you, perfume. In a lot of offices, I say it's just your typical office smell, the one that you know. You may not even notice it every day now, but there's probably a particular smell to your office. And then finally, taste. You can taste something even if you don't have food or drink in your mouth right now. It could be aftertaste. It could be just the sensation of your saliva and your tongue in your mouth. And so taking a couple minutes to connect folks, and you may open your eyes now, taking a couple minutes to connect folks to their 5 senses, it brings a couple things to light. It brings them to that current moment. It pauses them, it slows them down. And something that I do want to say, speaking as trainer to employers, managers, HR folks, self-care is, may on the surface appear to be something that takes away from the job, but in reality, it's making your employees more efficient at their job. They're happier, they're more fulfilled, and they are able to bring their best selves to work. So definitely let me know if you have any questions. That's my presentation in a nutshell. Obviously, a lot more fun stuff to go into when I'm up in front of the class. Thank you. Yes?
Could you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you came into this work?
Yes, my background, I spent 14 years in corporate human resources. So if you are HR folks in the room, been in your seat before. I actually literally was in your seat a couple summers ago. I attended this as an employer. And I really love working in human resources, and I'm a very high-striving person, focused on my career path, getting to the next level. And I had a point in my life where I was in the job that I'd always wanted. I had my family, my friends, like life looked really good on the surface, but I was not happy. I was not engaged, and I didn't know what to do. So I started my own path of self-discovery and my own journey of healing, and it was mindfulness that really spoke to me and was able to get me through that time to connect to what was most important to me and to find joy and fulfillment every day, even if, you know, some things were not always resonating, and it made me really think about what I was doing. So that's my story, very brief story of it. I can talk about that later too if we meet up at lunch. Happy to talk more.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.